It starts in the smallest way. A phone face down on the table, a room that is too quiet, your hand reaching for the screen before you even realize you're doing it. Not because you expect something specific anymore, but because your body still remembers the old ritual of waiting. The message that never comes, the explanation that never arrives, the emotional weather in the room that somehow still feels like your responsibility. And that is the strange part. You are not even in the conversation anymore, and yet part of you is still carrying it. You still feel the weight of what they did not say, the pause in their voice, the tension in their silence, the sadness they never named, the anger they disguised, the loneliness they leaked into the room without admitting it. You walked away from the words, but somehow you kept holding the atmosphere. That is how many people lose themselves without noticing it. Not through one dramatic betrayal, not through one obvious wound, but through years of becoming the place where other people's unspoken emotions go to live. You become the container, the interpreter, the translator, the one who senses the shift before anyone names it, the one who notices the tiredness behind the sharp tone, the fear behind the distance, the shame behind the anger, the emptiness behind the performance. And because you can feel it, you begin to carry it. At first, it looks like love. It looks like empathy, patience, loyalty, emotional intelligence. It looks like being the person who understands without needing everything explained. But over time, something else happens. Your sensitivity stops being a gift and starts becoming a job. You are no longer simply feeling with someone. You are managing them internally. You are absorbing what they refuse to face. You are holding tension that was never yours to hold. And then one day you realize you are tired in a way sleep does not fix. Not physically tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that makes you stare at the ceiling at night and feel a strange pressure in your chest, as if your body is trying to tell you something your mind keeps avoiding. The kind of tired that comes from being emotionally available to people who are not actually present. From reading the room so often that you stopped reading yourself. From being so good at sensing others that your own needs became faint, almost embarrassing, almost optional. This is where Carl Jung becomes important, because he helps explain something many people feel but cannot name. When a person keeps carrying another person's unspoken emotions, it is often not just kindness. It is often a complex, a deep emotional pattern that has roots far older than the present relationship. A complex is not just a feeling, it is a charged inner knot. It pulls you into the same role again and again. The rescuer, the peacekeeper, the interpreter, the one who makes chaos feel manageable, the one who keeps the emotional system from collapsing. And if you grew up needing to sense danger early, if you learned that love meant monitoring moods, if you had to become careful, useful, quiet, or emotionally fluent to stay safe, then this pattern can feel normal. It can even feel noble, but it is not neutral, because when your sensitivity is fused with survival, you stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "What do they need from me right now?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. It means your nervous system is no longer living inside your own life. It is living in other people's unfinished sentences. You begin to anticipate their disappointment before it happens. You soften your own truth before they can reject it. You explain yourself before they accuse you of being difficult. You apologize for things you did not cause. You make room for their silence, their confusion, their inconsistency, their hidden pain, their emotional immaturity. You become so practiced at carrying what they cannot carry that one day you no longer know where they end and you begin. That is not just empathy, that is self-erasure dressed as compassion. And this is where many people get confused, because the outside world often praises this behavior. You're so understanding, you're so patient, you're so easy to talk to, you're such a good person. Those words can feel like love, but sometimes they are just the language people use when you have become convenient to their unresolved inner life. Carl Jung understood something that matters here: the persona. The persona is the mask we wear to function in the world. It is the part of us that says, "This is who I am here. This is what you can expect from me." A healthy persona helps us move through life. But when the persona becomes too rigid, too praised, too necessary, it can trap us inside a role. For the empath, the role is often the good one, the calm one, the understanding one, the one who never makes things harder, the one who can hold the room together, the one who sees the best in people, the one who can absorb a little more, forgive a little more, explain a little more, tolerate a little more. And because that role is rewarded, it becomes dangerous. Because underneath the good persona, resentment begins to grow. Not ugly resentment, quiet resentment. The kind that does not scream, the kind that turns inward, the kind that shows up as exhaustion, numbness, sudden coldness, unexplained irritation, or that strange feeling that you are disappearing inside your own kindness. You still look generous from the outside, but inside, something has started to harden. Not because you became cruel, because you became overextended. The deeper truth is that the more you carry someone else's unspoken emotions, the less likely they are to face them. That is the part most people avoid. Your empathy can accidentally become the very thing that keeps the pattern alive. If you absorb the tension for them, they do not have to own it. If you explain the situation for them, they do not have to become clear. If you calm the room for them, they do not have to develop emotional responsibility. This is not about blame, it is about structure. A relationship pattern can become a closed loop. One person feels, the other avoids. One person names, the other deflects. One person repairs, the other repeats. Over time, the most sensitive person becomes the emotional stabilizer, while the other person remains protected by vagueness. And because you are sensitive, you may have mistaken the loop for depth. You may have thought, no one understands them like I do. You may have felt proud of your ability to see through the surface. You may have believed that your understanding was helping them heal. But sometimes, what you are really seeing is not depth. It is avoidance. It is a person who has never learned to hold their own inner weather, so they unconsciously hand it to someone else. That's where projection enters. Projection, in Jungian terms, is when we place something inside ourselves onto another person and relate to them as if they carry that quality. Sometimes we project desire, hope, innocence, danger, worth, or pain. In empath dynamics, projection often works in both directions. You may project goodness onto someone because you want to believe the pain has meaning. They may project stability onto you because you appear able to contain what they cannot. And so you become the emotional mirror. Not a mirror that reflects your own face, but one that reflects their unfinished life back to them. They come close when they need soothing. They pull away when they need to avoid themselves. They return when they want to feel seen. And because you are so good at reading what is not said, you keep trying to decode the silence instead of noticing what the silence is doing to you. Here is the uncomfortable question. What if the thing you have been calling love was partly a role your psyche learned to survive? What if your ability to sense everything was never just a gift, but also a wound? What if you were trained to believe that being needed was the same as being valued? That question can sting because it threatens the identity of the good one, the one who never gives up on people, the one who stays soft, the one who sees the pain behind the behavior, the one who can understand almost enough time. But understanding is not the same as surrendering yourself. You can understand someone and still stop carrying their emotional load. You can have compassion and still have limits. You can see their pain and refuse to become the storage room for it. And this is where the body begins to tell the truth before the mind does. Maybe you have noticed that your shoulders rise whenever their name appears on your screen. Maybe your stomach tightens before you even open a message. Maybe you feel a wave of guilt when you try to step back, as if distance itself is a moral failure. Maybe you feel responsible for their mood, even when they have not spoken to you in days. Maybe you find yourself rehearsing explanations in your head, trying to make your boundary sound gentle enough that it will not hurt them. That guilt is not always conscience. Sometimes guilt is conditioning. Sometimes guilt is the chain that kept you available. And this is where the shadow appears. Carl Jung used the word shadow for the parts of ourselves we do not want to see, the traits we reject, deny, or hide from ourselves. For the empath, the shadow is often not cruelty. It is anger, self-protection, detachment, the ability to say no without collapsing into guilt, the willingness to disappoint someone, the capacity to let another adult feel their own feelings without rushing in to rescue them. That shadow can feel terrifying at first, because if you have built your identity around being the one who understands, then setting a boundary can feel like becoming mean. But you are not becoming mean. You are meeting the part of yourself that knows where you end and someone else begins. And that part is sacred. The moment you stop carrying their unspoken emotions, you may feel a strange emptiness. People often panic here. They think something has gone wrong. They think they have become cold. They think they have lost their compassion. But what is happening is more subtle than that. Your nervous system is withdrawing from a role. For a long time, you may have been living in a state of emotional hyper-attunement, constantly scanning for signs, shifts, and cues. You were always listening for what was not said. That level of vigilance can become addictive because it gives the illusion of control. If you can sense everything, maybe you can prevent abandonment. Maybe you can prevent conflict. Maybe you can prevent the collapse of connection. But the cost is enormous. Because a life built on vigilance is not a life. It is an alert system. And sooner or later, the self pushes back. Jung's idea of the self is not the ego. The ego is the conscious I that tries to manage life. The self is deeper. It is the center of the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious together. It is the part of you that wants wholeness, not performance. It does not care whether you remain useful to everyone. It cares whether you become whole. So when you keep carrying emotions that are not yours, the self often creates discomfort. It may show up as fatigue, irritation, dreams, restlessness, emotional numbness, or the feeling that something inside you is quietly refusing to continue. Not because you are failing, because you are outgrowing a pattern. This is why some people suddenly feel less available after years of being endlessly available. It is not always a decision at first. Sometimes it is a collapse. The body says, no more. The soul says, I cannot keep being the place where everybody else's pain goes to hide. And what looks like withdrawal is often the beginning of individuation. Individuation is Jung's word for becoming more fully yourself. Not a perfected self, not a socially impressive self, a more truthful self, a self that no longer lives entirely through the expectations of others, a self that can carry compassion without self-abandonment. That is the real turning point, not when you stop caring, when you stop confusing care with carrying. There is a difference between witnessing someone's pain and making it your mission to metabolize it for them. There is a difference between supporting someone and becoming responsible for their inner life. There is a difference between loving someone and living inside their emotional shadow. And if you have been the one who always knows how to soothe, how to explain, how to soften, how to forgive, then this distinction may feel almost revolutionary. Because the moment you stop carrying their unspoken emotions, you begin to hear your own again. At first, it may be faint, a tiredness, a preference, a no that feels small but honest. A sense that you no longer want to explain yourself to people who only understand your silence when it benefits them. A realization that your peace has been repeatedly sacrificed to keep someone else comfortable. A sudden awareness that you have been editing yourself to preserve connection. That is not intimacy. That is adaptation. And adaptation, when it goes on too long, can become a prison. The person who has relied on your emotional carrying may not immediately understand the change. They may call you distant. They may call you different. They may say you are less warm, less available, less understanding. That reaction can be painful because it touches the old wound. If I stop carrying, will I still be loved? But that question itself is part of the old structure. Because if someone only feels close to you when you are over-functioning, then the connection was not built on mutuality. It was built on your labor, on your emotional work, on your willingness to absorb what they would not face. And the truth that hurts, but also frees, is this. The moment you stop carrying their unspoken emotions, you reveal the actual shape of the relationship. Not the fantasy, the shape. Some people will rise into honesty when you step back. They will finally have to speak plainly. They will finally have to own their feelings. They will finally have to meet you as a separate person, not as a container. Others will resist, guilt trip, withdraw, or become more confusing because your carrying was part of the system that kept them comfortable. Neither reaction means you are doing something wrong. It means the pattern is losing oxygen, and that is why boundaries often feel emotionally dramatic at first. Not because boundaries are dramatic, but because the system around them is used to your compliance. The first time you do not rescue, do not over-explain, do not absorb, do not translate, do not soothe on command, the whole atmosphere changes. Sometimes the other person becomes louder. Sometimes they become colder. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they suddenly notice your absence in a way they never noticed your presence. But the real question is not whether they notice. The real question is whether you do. Do you notice the relief under the fear? Do you notice your breath becoming deeper when you stop preparing for everyone else's moods? Do you notice how much of your life has been spent on emotional maintenance that was never truly reciprocal? If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself somewhere private. Just one sentence. Something honest, something that belongs to you. Because one sentence can be the beginning of a new inner contract. Not a dramatic declaration, not a performance, just a quiet truth you stop betraying. And maybe that truth sounds like this: I am allowed to stop carrying what is not mine. Or this: my empathy does not require my self-erasure. Or this: I can care without becoming the container for everything they refuse to feel. That sentence matters because language changes identity. What you can name, you can begin to separate from. What you can separate from, you can begin to see clearly. And what you can see clearly no longer owns you in the same way. This is also why the final silence of an empath can be so powerful. Not because it is a tactic, but because it is often the first time the empath is no longer leaking themselves into the room. The silence is not punishment. It is not a game. It is not a way to make someone chase you. It is the sound of a nervous system stepping out of duty. That silence can feel unsettling if you have spent years making yourself emotionally available on demand. It can feel like guilt. It can feel like loss. It can feel like betrayal. But sometimes, silence is the first honest boundary your body has been trying to create for years. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. You start noticing things you ignored before. How often you were the one to initiate repair. How often you were the one to soften the edge. How often you carried the emotional ambiguity because it would have been too uncomfortable for them to face it. How often your intuition was correct, but you dismissed it because being right would have required a boundary you were not yet ready to hold. That is another layer Jung helps illuminate. The unconscious does not only speak through dreams and symbols, it also speaks through repetition, through the same kind of pain arriving in different clothes, through the same role appearing with different people, through the same emotional exhaustion disguised as devotion. If you keep ending up as the one who carries everyone else's invisible burden, the psyche may be trying to show you a pattern that cannot be healed by more patience. It is healed by consciousness, by seeing the role, by grieving the role, by refusing to keep performing it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. There may be a day when you feel almost guilty for not checking in, guilty for not fixing, guilty for not translating their silence into meaning. That guilt may rise like a reflex. Let it rise. Do not obey it immediately. Ask yourself whether it is actually guilt or simply the discomfort of not being needed in the old way. Because being needed can become a substitute for being loved. And if you have lived there for a long time, stepping out can feel like free fall. But free fall is not always danger. Sometimes it is the beginning of learning that the ground beneath you was never the relationship. It was your own neglected center. The more you return to that center, the less you need to carry the unsaid emotions of others to feel secure. You begin to trust the difference between compassion and fusion, between presence and responsibility, between love and labor, between intuition and over-identification. And your life starts to feel quieter, not empty, quieter. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own mind again. The kind of quiet that lets your body relax its grip. The kind of quiet that makes a closed phone feel less like abandonment and more like space. The kind of quiet that no longer interprets every silence as an emergency. That is what happens when the psyche starts to come back to itself. You stop entering rooms as a caretaker of invisible weather. You stop walking into conversations already carrying someone else's pain. You stop trying to be the bridge over every emotional gap. And slowly, your energy returns to you. Not all at once, not dramatically, in fragments, in small acts of self-respect, in a pause before replying, in the decision not to explain yourself one more time, in the relief of not reaching for what is vague and unavailable, in the moment you realize that your peace has become more important than being understood by people who profit from your confusion. That is not coldness, that is maturity. That is the difference between the persona of the good one and the reality of a whole person. A whole person can disappoint others without collapsing into shame. A whole person can feel compassion without becoming consumed. A whole person can love without volunteering to carry what belongs to someone else. And if your life has been shaped by emotional over-responsibility, then this is not a small adjustment. It is a psychological turning. You are not simply changing a habit, you are changing your relationship to yourself. The old self believed that love meant carrying more than your share, anticipating everything, smoothing every edge, and becoming indispensable through emotional labor. The new self understands that love without boundaries is not love. It is self-abandonment with a beautiful name. That does not mean you become hard, it means you become clear. And clarity is kinder than exhaustion pretending to be devotion. The person who once benefited from your carrying may not know what to do with your clarity. That is not your burden to solve. Your task is not to make the transition comfortable for everyone else. Your task is to stop betraying the part of you that has been asking for relief. Carl Jung would have understood that a psyche cannot move toward wholeness while one part of it is constantly serving the unconscious demands of others. At some point, the ego must stop saying yes to everything that drains the self. At some point, the mask must loosen. At some point, the role must end. And when it ends, there is grief. Grief for the version of you that thought carrying everyone was how you stayed connected. Grief for the times you were praised for being easy to lean on, when what you really needed was someone who could lean back. Grief for the years you spent translating silence into meaning that protected everyone but you. Let yourself feel that grief. It is part of the release. Because what you are losing is not just a burden, it is an identity. And even painful identities can feel safe when they have been there a long time. But beneath the grief is something steadier, a dignity that does not need to be announced, a boundary that does not need to be defended in 1,000 words, a quieter face, a steadier breath, a room inside you that is no longer crowded by everyone else's unfinished emotions. And maybe this is the most important thing to remember. You do not have to become less caring to become free. You only have to stop confusing your sensitivity with your obligation. That is where the healing begins, not in hardening, in separating, not in becoming indifferent, in becoming clear, not in carrying less love, in carrying less that was never yours. So the next time your hand reaches for the phone and you feel that old pull to translate, to rescue, to absorb, to manage, pause for one breath, just one, and ask yourself a different question. Not, what are they feeling? But, what am I carrying that I can put down now? That question can change a life. Because the moment you stop carrying their unspoken emotions, you finally make room for your own. And your own emotions, after being ignored for so long, may arrive quietly at first. A tired truth, a clean no, a small relief, a deeper breath, a sense that your life is no longer organized around someone else's inner weather. That is not the end of love. It is the end of self-abandonment. And when you are ready, that is where the real beginning lives.